So I got a message from a friend on WhatsApp at, well, early o'clock in my part of the world, which means that she was writing it to me pretty late at night, saying, you know, basically, I'm trying to have a relationship when you meet is extremely difficult. I will try and sabotage the shit out of some goodness. I need a sanity check when you have time. Well, let me give you a sanity check now and do something that's going to help lots of people. Relationships, when you are carrying what we call CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress response or disorder, which is usually created by being raised in adverse childhood conditions, ACE. It's all a lot of very technical sounding stuff that basically means you're raised in an environment that wasn't particularly boundaried or healthy. A lot of your boundaries were infringed upon, and it was extremely emotionally and psychologically stressful, and you couldn't escape it. So you end up with a whole string of potential symptoms that other people don't have who don't carry this disorder, and they're all invisible. They're like invisible emotional wounds. One of the major symptoms that you'll have is a distorted or skewed view of reality, and the other one is that you'll be subjected to something that we usually refer to as emotional flashbacks. An emotional flashback is kind of like your standard flashback. You know, you see movies about war veterans, people coming back from Vietnam, and they flash back to the traumatic incidents of being in battle. Or you've heard the term flashback regarding drugs. So somebody takes LSD, and then a few years later they have a flashback and they start to re-trip on that drug again. Well, this is an emotional flashback. So you start to re-experience, based on a certain trigger in the environment, the emotional responses that you would have had as a child when you couldn't escape a traumatic, boundary breaking, emotionally disturbing environment. And those emotional flashbacks could be extreme rage, extreme depression and helplessness, frustration, freezing, just totally shutting down and freezing, flight from the scenario by disappearing into your imagination and creating like a fake world, or fawning, like negotiating with these dark forces that were much more powerful than you, that you couldn't escape. Over a period of time, when you have that, what happens is you grow up with what they call emotional dysregulation. So your emotions are up and down all the time. And so it becomes very difficult to just have a normal, healthy, sane relationship. You want it. You really want to be in a healthy, sane relationship, but you got a certain number of things that are playing against you, kid. There's a few things that are going against you. One thing is the type of person you're going to naturally feel attracted to is now going to be warped. You're going to naturally, sorry, not naturally, misuse the word natural, instinctively feel attracted to people who are a bit more abusive. And very often this abuse will be covert abuse, or the abuse might not be what you think of as abuse right now, meaning they could be very passive and they might just be emotionally unavailable, and your brain will go, well, that's not abuse. Abuse is when somebody puts cigarettes out on you or slaps you around. No, abuse can also be just total and utter neglect and denial of your emotional needs. When you were a child, you needed, for example, your father's love. You needed a boundaried, supportive, loving father that was not conditional. If it was conditional, or if he just didn't give you that love, you're going to grow up feeling sad. You're going to grow up with bits of you missing. You need your mother to give you love. And if she doesn't have time for you, or if her love is at times very intense, and then because she's emotionally dysregulated, total indifference or rage or blah, 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 then again, that's going to do damage to you. And the inner system, the software gets warped. It picks up viruses and malware and spyware that stops it from functioning properly. So one is you're going to naturally feel drawn to people that maybe aren't the best for you. And that's something you've got to work through and you've got to look at. And the second thing is that perversely, and maybe it's counterintuitive for some people, I was shocked when I learned this, The more intimate you get with somebody, the harder it gets. So you said specifically that you sabotage things that are good. You said, I will always sabotage some goodness. So if you see a relationship as being good, potentially good, why would you sabotage it? I will explain for you. The reason why you sabotage it, I will explain in this. Sorry, I just got sort of my hands, wiped my nose, and then thought, hey, I'm going to have a sooty nose for the duration of this video. I drew a graph. Okay, so it's going to be hard to read this graph. On this axis here, you have drama and cray-cray. This is when your responses cease to be sane and balanced and emotionally boundaried, and you yourself get a little cray. That goes up as this develops. And what's this? Well, this is three things. Number one, this is intimacy. As intimacy develops and grows and you get closer to the other person, which is what you want at the conscious level, that's what you want, your own responses become a little bit more weird. Your perceptions get a little bit more blurry and freaky. You become a bit more cray-cray and there's more drama. Well, what else is there other than intimacy that's developing here? There's no such thing as intimacy without vulnerability. I wrote this in amazing scrawl so that it would be indecipherable other than by Egyptologists. So where there's intimacy, you're always going to have vulnerability. And where there's vulnerability, obviously there's going to be risk. So the greater the intimacy, the greater the vulnerability, the greater the risk, the crazier you're going to get. The more drama you're going to bring into the relationship. So it's kind of like an approach avoidance. So you're drawn to do this thing, to be with this person, to get closer to them because you want to be loved. But there's no real love without intimacy. There's no real love without vulnerability, and there's no real love without risk. So as you get into the riskier zone, you will respond in a certain way. Now, everybody's complex PTSD responses are a little bit different. We have tendencies that fall into four main categories. Stay with me. I know it sounds like it's getting complicated, but really isn't. They fall into four main categories: fight, flight, fawn, and freeze. So as you get provoked or triggered into an emotional flashback, you'll have an emotional flashback predominant response. We all do all four, but everybody has a predominant response. So for me, as I get closer to a person and my intimacy and vulnerability develops, then the drama and craziness that comes out of me will tend to be somewhere in the traumatic response, predominantly of fight and aggression, because that's how I mitigate threat, perceived emotional threat, seconded by fawning. Fawning is, you're trying to negotiate your way out of danger. You're trying to perform, you're trying to manipulate, you're trying to avoid being killed by, the dark, powerful forces, by being what you think the other person wants. Other responses are to run, just pure flight, like, oh my God, this is getting too intimate, fuck it, I'll run. And literally, what I personally theorize is that your fight types choose in their pastimes to do fighty things like lifting weights and martial arts. And people who are tending towards flight actually tend towards being runners or triathletes, or people who literally run. Fawn types actually literally become great debaters or actors or stand-up comics. Stand-up comics actually, I think, also will be fight and fawn. So there'll be, in a lot of stand-up comedy, you'll see anger. Stephen King said comedy is often anger with makeup on. And then you have, what did I not mention? Freezing, people who freeze. Now the freeze response could manifest in lots of different ways. It could be people who take drugs, but they'll take, if you just say, oh, freeze response is drug taking, well, not necessarily, because my drug of choice would be amphetamines when I don't do drugs now, obviously. Can't be a life coach to be taking drugs. But my drug of choice when I did used to use drugs would be things that would take me up and out. So things like, I enjoyed things like speed, or cocaine, because it's upwards and outwards. Other people get more out of weed and ecstasy or LSD, so they want to go on a ride, they want to passively be on a trip, or they want to kind of opt out of life, or alcohol. These are things that I didn't enjoy. I mean, some of them actually really freaked me out because of the lack of control. Alcohol, something, yeah, it's fine, but it doesn't have that mass appeal to me. Cocaine, can't really play with that one, me personally, because it's too appealing. It's too, like, I just can't. Would you like a little line? No, I'm going to say no. This time I'm definitely going to say no. I can't afford to do that. So my point is that everybody responds in a different way to the trauma. Now, as you become more vulnerable with a person, you might have a flight response, which means that when you're triggered by your own feelings, it's got nothing to do necessarily might be something to do with them, or it might not, and this is where it gets further complex. If you're triggered by the other person and you get an emotional flashback and a traumatic response of flight, your whole thing might be shut it down, fuck it then, fuck it, I'm leaving, fuck this, I can't, you know, I like you, so now I'm emotionally vulnerable, so now I'm flashing back, and because you said you like your eggs scrambled rather than boiled, that must mean you're a psychopath, just like my ex, because he fucking loves scrambled eggs. So fuck you in the eye, I'm out the door. And you leave. Now, where this becomes, like, that sounds bad and it sounds crazy. I know it sounds cray-cray, full of drama, just like on the graph. But that's not where it ends. What happens is, over time, anything you do a lot of, you get really good at. You get skilled at that. So you get skilled at leaving. You get skilled at saying, fuck this, I'm out of here. And it almost becomes like a muscle that you grow over the years. And then it becomes your superpower. Then your superpower, the thing that you think is protecting you, is your ability to walk away and leave. Like in the film Heat, where the character Robert De Niro, who's this, you know, really clever criminal, this super thief, says never have anything that you can't walk away from inside of 30 seconds as soon as you feel the heat around the corner. And then he eventually gets caught, killed. I'm sorry if that's a plot spoiler. Like, you should have seen this film like 5 times at least. It came out in the 90s. Great Michael Mann film. He dies. I'm sorry, he dies. But the reason why is because he falls in love. He falls in love when he becomes vulnerable, and then his whole survival mechanism falls apart. The heat comes around the corner, and he doesn't leave and drop everything as he should do, or he leaves it too late to do that. So that becomes a superpower, that becomes a skill, that becomes ingrained in you. Like for me, I get really angry, so my superpower is I'm the Incredible Hulk. So when I am provoked or I flashback, I go into massive rage. Now, I said superpower because, ironically, because it's childish. I'm not the Incredible Hulk. He's not real. And comics are, you know, like, I enjoy comics as much as the next person. I'm trying to shame anybody here, but that's kind of kids. Like, you can enjoy it as an adult. Don't shout at me, comic loving nerds. But it's kind of for kids. You got to realize that, like, it's not real. Superpowers aren't real. So my superpower is rage. Well, how useful is that in the body and the mind and the life of a middle-aged man who's trying to get on with his? It's not useful. It's not fucking helpful. Similarly, the flight response isn't helpful. Similarly, if you're a freeze flight and your superpower is disassociation, nothing can hurt me, because if you try and hurt me, I won't even be there. So your superpower, I guess, let's stretch this metaphor, we'll call it invisibility. You're like the invisible woman. That's not useful to fucking be really good at dissociating in life. What's going to happen when you get married and have kids, and your kids need you, and you flash back into an emotional flashback, and your kids need you, and you're under pressure? Boom, you just leave. You're just gone. You know, like at the end of Brazil, the movie Brazil, by Terry Gilliam, where the guy's just sat there going, do, 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 do. He's doing like the theme tune to Brazil with his eyes all glassy, and he's like in this deep psychosis bordering on catatonia. That's complete because of the stress. His mind's broken because of the overwhelming stress he's faced. That's the ultimate freeze-fright response. Flight freeze response. That's what it is. So that's what happens. You're not self-sabotaging because you're crazy or you're self-destructive or you hate yourself or you haven't done enough affirmations telling yourself you're a precious snowflake and all is well in the world. It's not really self-sabotage at all. It's a response to trauma that if it's left, and this is what I was going to go on to say before, let me finish what I was going to say before. If it's left untackled, if CPTSD is left untackled, if your traumatic response is left to grow and calcify and rigidify as who you are, you'll get sicker and sicker. The prognosis long term for people with CPTSD, which is not yet an officially recognized diagnosis, is not good. People with CPTSD, if it's untreated, die younger, get more physical illnesses, will abuse more drugs, will engage in more dangerous activities, will blah, 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 blah. Life isn't good if you don't treat the CPTSD. And it really is just as simple as treating the emotional flashbacks and just getting to the fucking point. Stop talking around like how it is you really feel and be vulnerable. But here's the tricky thing for people with CPTSD. If I say to you, okay, go and find a coach, go and find a counselor, go and find a therapist, what happens in therapy? What happens in coaching? Well, you have to be vulnerable and you have to open yourself up and tell the truth. A number of times I see people online or I have people come and whinge to me about how therapy didn't work for them. And then when you actually look further, you see, well, you lied to the therapist. You said you were like, to give you like a slightly graphic example here, you said that you were assaulted once when actually you were assaulted 10 times. I've sat on both sides of the therapeutic ping pong table, and I can tell you that as the coach or the counselor, you need to know. These are the kinds of details that if you skim over because you're in your self-preservation mode, it's not going to help. You've got to be like, when therapy worked for me, when counseling finally worked for me, was when I did my due diligence. I interviewed about 10 different counselors over the phone. I picked one and I was like, so what, you trust this woman now. You picked her, don't fuck around. Trust her. Unless she gives you a reason not to, trust her and do what she says. Follow the advice that she says. And I said that to her. I was like, whatever you tell me to do that's going to give me a chance of getting better, I'm going to do it. Whatever, if it's chanting or Native American rain dancing or whatever thing that I think isn't going to work that you tell me to do, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take my hands off the steering wheel, pull them off, and let you be in charge of it, as triggering as that is, as triggering as I might find it. Now, because my trauma response is fight fawn, I actually didn't really find the therapeutic process very triggering. But if your trauma response is flight freeze or flight fawn or freeze fight, then you might have a different thing with therapy and with coaching. You might be triggered by the idea that somebody understands you better than you. You might be triggered by the idea that the power dynamic of the relationship is, oh shit, the therapist has seen me vulnerable. Like now you need to freak out, attack the therapist, attack the therapeutic context. Say, not only is this therapist full of shit, but therapy is nonsense and I'm never gonna do it ever again. And then storm off in an adolescent huff. Which some people do, and who is hurt by that? Only the person themselves. Ultimately, we have to start somewhere in gaining traction with this kind of thing. So let me show you this little graph again, so it's embedded into your brain box. What's happening is not self-sabotage. You're not you're not crazy like in a I hate myself self-destruction way. That's not what it is. It's an emotional flashback. It's not craziness. It's just a little cray-cray. It's just a little bit of drama. It's not that big a deal. And it happens as you get closer to the other person and you move along this axis for intimacy, vulnerability, and risk. So you get like, whoa, you start to get a bit hypersensitive and your emotions do this. Like if we plotted a graph of your emotions, your emotional regulation gets out of whack and you start to go into emotional flashbacks. But the cool thing about this Once you've got the right model of what's really happening, you can take hold of it and go, I'm in an emotional flashback. So this might not be about objective reality. Let me deal with my stuff, with my emotional flashback first, and then come back to this when I'm calmer. If you're in a highly dysregulated emotional state and you communicate with the other person in that state, you're going to fuck up the whole system of communication. I should have planned this. So what happens is, if you do that, you corrupt the medium by which you're trying to regulate and sort this issue out. Yeah. So communication, he writes and scroll at the top. I'm drawing a circle. I will show it to you now. You, them. Okay. So here's communication, right? This is you. You're an entity here, and this is the other. This is the other person. So it says communication there. This is you. This is them. So you have a. Let me draw a heart, and it represents a feeling. So you have a feeling, and let me draw a brain up here, which looks like a cloud. And you have a thought and a feeling, and then you take an action and you say something. And this is just normal communication. So say it's, I'm thirsty and I would like a cup of tea. So you sit there and you go, I'm thirsty and I'd like a cup of tea, and you feel that and you think that, and out of your mouth, out of your face, you make sounds. Cup of tea, please. And you say it to the other person, and they also have feelings and a brain, and they say, I feel like I also would like a cup of tea, and I totally know how to make that, and I want to have a cup of tea with you, and I want to make it for you, so I'm going to do it now. And they then do it. That's communication. You shouldn't just ask people for cups of tea, you should totally make them one as well. You know, like when somebody's talking to you, you should listen, because there's other people in the world, okay? The problem with CPTSD, and when it's misdiagnosed as a borderline personality disorder, because of all these emotional flashbacks, it can make us a bit self-centered and a bit selfish. Don't go into a shame spiral because I just said that. It's science. It's just systems thinking. Why would you be selfish and self-centered if you're in pain, or if you're in an emotional flashback and you don't feel good? Look, there's Max's bum. I can point at it with my pen. Maxie, that's your bum. Why would that be a problem? Well, if I at night get out of bed to go to the bathroom, and as I walk past the door and I think it's closed but it's open, and I smash my toe, which has loads of little nerves in it, right into the door, the entire universe, my entire consciousness evaporates, and all that my mind is full of is the exploding flashing lights of shock and pain that is being sent to me from my toe. All these signals are going, fuck dude, you just exploded a mini grenade inside of your toenail, which obviously didn't happen, but that's what my brain is telling me. That's what my central nervous system is telling me for a few seconds. And it overrides everything. Like we can't have a psychological, philosophical discussion right at that moment, because I'm kind of busy with shit at that moment. I'm in pain right now. So that's why it can make us self-centered. And this becomes self-isolating, because you're then you forget, like, unless you make a conscious effort, you kind of start to forget that other people also are having needs and pain and things, because every day you're in this struggle with yourself. I know, I've lived it. And it was a conscious effort on my part to go, okay, there's another human being there, dude. Like, when they're talking, listen, look at them, give them that gift of just conscious awareness, of just to look and go, tell me, say your stuff, tell me what you're feeling now, what's your life right now, how does that feel? And just have the decency to be present to them and listen. It's a great discipline to have. But let's get back to the perversion of communication. So here's you with your heart and your brain, and you're dating somebody. And let's say in this example, you're a girl. So you're a girl, and this is some handsome dude. He looks just like Jax from Sons of Anarchy. My gosh, he's so hot. So your things are going okay. And then you're texting each other as you do, you're WhatsApping each other as you do in the modern age. And it's a Friday night and you have a few drinks and the texts aren't coming through. You're like, he's out with his friends and you're out with your friends, and the texts aren't coming through with as much regularity as they should. He's said nothing. Like, there's nothing in his text that's weird. Everything is good. I'm having a good time, babe. Are you having a good time? Now he's Australian for no reason. Oh, I'm having a good time, baby. You having a good time? Yeah, I'm having a good time too. And everything written is fine, but he's not the pace. Like during the day, he usually answers within 10 minutes. Now he's not answering for like half an hour, 40 minutes at a time. The dude's just out with his friends and busy wherever, or if it's a girl and a boy, and the girl's just out with their friends and they're just chatting and they're just in the zone of had a little bit of alcohol. They're in a different emotional, mental state. They're in different, she hasn't seen her friends all week. He hasn't seen his friends all week, and they're just there in that. So they're still like you. It's just, it's taking a little bit long to text back. No problem if you have no problem. But here's where it gets tricky for people with CPTSD who are emotionally dysregulated. You send his communication, here's you, your heart, your brain, you're sending a text to him, and his communication alters subtly. He's now not taking 10 minutes to get back to you. He's now taking more like 40 minutes to an hour. Somewhere inside of you, a little alarm starts to go, and you get a little spike. You get a little bit of a spike of adrenaline. You start to feel a little spike of adrenaline. You start to get a little bit anxious. And before you know it, just because he's taking a certain amount of time longer than what you're used to, you're starting to go into an emotional flashback. Now you're out in an environment that is noisy and full of drunk people with no boundaries and emotions just hanging out and bumping into your face, and you've had alcohol, which is a disinhibitor, so where you might get an adrenaline spike, there's like, whoop, just a little, ooh, how cheeky of you. Now it's going whew, a little bit more. Then you get that adrenaline spike, and then you start to go into a communication with yourself where you're getting data from the outside, but your heart now, your heart rate literally physically is beating faster, and the blood flow, shall we just to keep it simple, is now changing in your brain, and your brain is sending out signals to release a cocktail of different hormones. This isn't a biochemistry lesson. Let's just call it all adrenaline. It's a kind of a chemical stress response. If you want to get into the HPA axis and all of that, I don't want to do it here because it's going to overwhelm people with words. You don't really need to know. It's a survival mechanism in your brain. I said I would keep it simple. It's just your brain, kid. Your brain is freaking the fuck out, and your heart is also now freaking out. Now, here's what you do. You, in your emotional flashback, you start to change your communication with the other, because now you're flashing back. So maybe now you're a bit aggressive, but you don't mean to be. Or maybe now you're a bit anxious and self-abandoning. So if let's take the aggressive traumatic response. So you're obviously having a good time. So you're obviously having a good time, Mr. I can fucking text me back inside of 40 minutes, man. Too important, man. Or self-abandonment, like an anxious response would be, oh, you know, like, oh, you must be really busy right now. Too busy to talk to me. So I'm just like, whatever, just text me later when you can. The point is you change, you've changed. And now your communication has changed, and he's going to pick that up and he's going to go, what? Or she's going to go, what? What are you talking about? So if you're a guy and you do that, it's the same thing. Then the girl is going to get that text and be like, what the fuck is this guy on about? What are you talking about? Why, what? I'm out having a good time, and now there's a problem. What's the problem? What's the problem? How many arguments have started with that one sentence, by the way? I'm out having a good time, and suddenly you're acting crazy. That's, I imagine, many arguments will have started just like that. Now, that little incident I gave you, you go, oh yeah, I can see how that's a problem. Again, just like the CPTSD response that takes place over time, this becomes a much bigger problem, because this calcifies as a way of communicating with other people, such that you've self-abandoned. You've abandoned yourself. You're not acknowledging your own feelings. And I'm going to explain to you why in the very next section. You're not acknowledging your own feelings because you're a CPTSD tough girl. You should have been in the Navy fucking SEALs with that attitude. You're a CPTSD tough girl or tough guy, so it's like, oh, I don't need to feel my feelings. Fuck my feelings. My feelings are weakness. But we'll get into that in a minute. So you don't acknowledge even. Look how bored Max is. Oh, little Max is a little black nose. You don't even acknowledge that you're in an emotional flashback, and you just surge ahead, and you don't acknowledge that now your communication is tainted with like a flavor of aggression or passive aggressive sadness. Like, you clearly don't even want to talk to me. And it's not your intention to be like that, but that's how you're feeling. You don't realize that's how you're feeling, and it just comes out. So here's a good lesson for you. Let's find another piece of paper for me to write on. No, we'll write on this piece of paper because I need to stick with this. Oh, the pen's worn out. Okay, I'll just say it with my face. Your state transmits. So when we're looking at this, like, really, everybody needs to learn better communication skills, but nobody needs to learn better communication skills like the emotionally dysregulated, like people who've been misdiagnosed with borderline personality disorder, who actually really have CPTSD. Let me give you a little Anthony Robbins quote. It's a great one. The quality of your life is the quality of your communication, is a direct reflection of the quality of your communication with yourself and others. Let that one sink in. As the Swedes would say, suck on that caramel. Suck on that caramel for a few. That's a real Swedish expression. They have some weird fucking expressions. Suck on that caramel. So think about that little piece of wisdom for a few days. The quality of your life is a direct reflection of the quality of your communication with yourself and with others. So remember this as a rule of communication. Your state transmits. I can't come on and do a YouTube video and be like, I didn't feel very good today, and I don't even really want to do this video, so I'm just going to talk like a bored hipster the entire time. And a lot of people do YouTube videos like that, and I'm like, guys, you just got to get into a different state. Whatever I want you to feel, I need to feel that first. So if I want you to feel motivated, hopeful, curious, somewhat amused and brave, then I need to feel that first. I need to go into that emotional state first. So your state transmits. You don't know it because nobody taught it to you, but you have weak boundaries. And I'm not saying you have weak boundaries like you're a weak person. All that that means is over time, when you were a child and your personality was forming, external powerful forces that you had no control over and no consent to kept pushing you and breaking those boundaries, like the boundaries around a castle, like a castle wall, mortify it, and it left holes. And as a consequence of that, when you have porous ego boundaries, in psychology, we say you have weak boundaries. It doesn't mean you're a weak person. What it means is the wall around your personality, your emotional self, now has holes in it. So influence from other people is leaking in that shouldn't be getting in there. And parts of you are getting out that shouldn't be getting out. And when they do, you're surprised. You're like, oh shit, I didn't even mean to sound like that. I didn't even mean to say that. It's weak boundaries. Weak boundaries flows both ways. I'm not saying you're a weak person. I'm saying this thing you have called boundaries is weak. It's really easy to fix. It takes, like, if you try hard, it takes about 5 or 6 months and it'll change your fucking life. So there's bits of you that are floating out there, that's bleeding out there, that shouldn't be bleeding out, and the stuff that's bleeding in that shouldn't be bleeding in. That's all that weak boundaries means. Your state transmits. So you need to make sure when you're communicating with somebody, if you're trying to say to them, hey, I want to hang out with you sometime because I miss you, that's what you say in the content and in the context of how you say it. Because if what comes out is like aggressive or cranky or passive aggressive, like, well, you don't even have the fucking time for me, man, then what happens is the whole system of communication here becomes corrupted, because now the other person's like, what the fuck? Why would you, what do you fucking mean? Then they might go into an emotional flashback And then you have, it can sometimes be called countertransference. So the therapist then starts to, or the coach, if this was a client-coach relationship, then starts to project their own stuff that's unresolved onto the client, and then they will re-trigger the client into another emotional flashback, who then says something else that's cray and inducing of drama, and so it goes on. The whole cycle of communication is now corrupted because of emotional flashbacks that are out of whack, and because of communication that is not thought through. Be careful with how you're talking to other people and how you're talking to yourself, because you can have unexpected reactions from other people. I had that for years, and I do think it was because of CPTSD. I was flashbacking and I didn't acknowledge my own feelings. I didn't acknowledge that I was in a flashback, and I'd say something and it would have the opposite effect of what I had. You know what happened then? I'm fucking bewildered. I'm bewildered, and I just assume there's something wrong with me, that nobody else has this problem. There must be something wrong with me, which is the mantra of people with CPTSD. You want to know if you have CPTSD? Ask yourself if you've ever sat there going, there must be something wrong with me. There must be something wrong with me. There must be something wrong with me. Or, what the fuck is wrong with me? What the fuck is wrong with me? What the fuck is wrong with me? Somebody should make a little song of that, like a dubstep, trap music. Anyway, so the cycle of communication then becomes corrupted. And then the other person, depending on their trauma response style, or where they are in terms of emotional dysregulation, may fight you, or just leave, or just go, well, fuck it then, I'm not doing this, I'm off. It's an overreaction. Now, here's the problem. Culturally, as we're moving to culturally generally in society, people are becoming less skilled in an ability to be emotionally intelligent and socially intelligent and think in terms of context. And as their worlds get smaller through the wonders of technology, which allows us to do this, and I can talk to people all over the place, just like within seconds, it's fucking amazing. We become more, there is a tendency for greater hypersensitivity and a lack of an ability to kind of go, okay, what does this person mean? Just very, very recently, somebody else sent me a WhatsApp that referenced an in-joke that I had with them from 3 years ago, and they just glibly, they just picked it up and went, oh, well, I'll totally put that in the fucking refrigerator for you. And it was a joke from 3 years ago that I had forgotten because I was busy doing stuff when that came through. And I actually got another person and went, Jesus, look at this WhatsApp interaction. Is she mad at me? She sounds really angry with me. And the person I showed it to was like, she really sounds really pissed off with what you said to her there. Oh, okay. I'm not going to do or say anything for 24 hours and see if something just slots into place, because this person lives far away from me. I live in another country. And then as I thought about it, I kind of went to sleep or woke up. I'd had a bit of a dream about them. And I woke up, I was like, it's a reference to an in-joke. And this is the problem with text speak and in-jokes. Like, you are saying a lot with one sentence. This is really dumb and lame, but before I even knew how to internet, because I'm not an internet savvy person, I was very late to Facebook. I didn't even get a Facebook until 2009. I thought it was all nonsense. I could barely use an email, even though like I was, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm not a very internet sort of savvy person. A friend of mine, I told him that I had done a thing that I was trying to do for ages and I was successful in doing it. And I told him, via the Facebook messaging system, I said, I finally, got that proposal through for the dubba. And his reply was, that's my dog. I was like, I'm sorry? That's my dog. And I was like, I wasn't referencing dogs. And I don't know what the fuck you're saying, but I didn't get the intonation. He was being funny and he was saying, that's my dog. And I was like, oh, you're doing like an American congratulatory thing. Excellent. Afterwards, we had a laugh about it, but it can get serious, and it can get serious very quickly, especially in the initial phases of a relationship with somebody where if you both like each other, you're very scared. And here's one of these cultural taboos that nobody ever brings up. The reason why it's so intense, so emotionally intense, and it needs to be addressed is you're gambling with your DNA. You're gambling with your life when you're forming a relationship in the early phases. And this is why everybody gets weird in the first part of a relationship. You can be super awkward. You can tell jokes that you would never tell. You can do weird things because the stakes are really, really high. And everybody's like, oh, just be cool, just be yourself. Well, imagine doing a job interview where, as a result of that job interview, if you get that job interview, you're going to have that job for life. And it could be amazing, or it could really, really suck, and you wouldn't be able to get out of it. And as a result of that job interview, you're also going to have babies and a family with the boss of that job, if you like, to extend that metaphor to a ridiculous extent. My point is the stakes are very, very high, which is why emotionally dysregulated, CPTSD or not, you will be emotionally dysregulated if you're a totally normal person who didn't have an adverse childhood environment, just by virtue of what it is. You're gambling with your DNA. It's one of the most important fucking decisions you're ever going to make in your life. Of course you're going to be a bit about the whole thing and freaked out when somebody doesn't text you back. That's like thinking that you've got a job that's the best job you've always wanted it, and the boss of that job says, okay, I'll text you back in 5 minutes to let you know whether you've got it or not. We think you do, but we need to make our final decision. And then they leave you waiting for 10 days before they say, you'd be a bit strung out after that as well. So you've got to have compassion for yourself. One of the things that the big guru of CPTSD for me, for my money, is Pete Walker. And Pete Walker brings us back to, like, in curing CPTSD, one thing is called psychoeducation. That's not education in how to be a psycho. That's psychological education. So you actually need to teach the person suffering from CPTSD, this is the model of what's really happening. Educate, train, you know, understand, become somebody who understands this stuff better. And the other big thing he talks about a lot is self-compassion. You've got to be compassionate to the self, which segues into the next section, a very important section. Why are you such a fucking hard case? Why are you trying to be like the Bruce Willis of emotions? Die Hard Bruce Willis in Die Hard, who walks on glass, or Bruce Willis in The Last Boy Scout, plus the Bruce Willis of Die Hard. He gets punched, he gets shot, he gets stabbed, and his response to everything is a crinkly forehead, like kind of a, oh, if you do that again, I'm going to kill you kind of thing. And then he kills everybody. Kills everybody, just kills everybody, whoever it was. And that's what you're trying to be. Why? Okay, here's an important thing. Dennis says, Richard and Pete Walker are the Batman and Robin of CPTSD. As long as I can be Robin, I totally want to wear those little pants. Kim says, hi Richard, my question is, how can I handle bumping into my mum because I've cut her off? That's a broader question that's I'm not going to cover in today's topic, but it's a good question. It's a very, very good question. You need to keep reminding me, guys, that I need to do some kind of a course on handling contact with an abusive narcissist, cluster B personality type, and I will eventually cover that. Let's move into the next section. Somebody asked me this question this morning. Very, very important thing for people with CPTSD. Well, the person I'm doing this video for is texting me now. How exciting. So somebody asked me this question this morning. It's super, super important. And he said, can you give me the distinction between counterdependency and codependency? So here's my answer for you, my friend. And why is this important? Counterdependency for people with CPTSD, particularly the person who's asking me this question. Codependency versus counterdependency. Counterdependency, I'm getting it straight from Wikipedia. Boys and girls, everybody keeps saying, oh, you're really clever with the things you say and what you do. And I can only use the same internet as you're using. I just get my information predominantly from what's out there. Counterdependency, very simply, is a state that you go into where you kind of reject attachment, where you reject being too intimate with another person, usually because of childhood trauma. From Wikipedia, counterdependency is the state of refusal of attachment, the denial of personal need and dependency, and may, but not always, but it may extend to the omnipotence and refusal of dialogue found in destructive narcissism, for example. So when you're being all tough and self-protecting, with your counter-dependent tendencies of like, no, I don't need intimacy, that's for weak people, I don't need love, I don't, which is all crazy talk. Like, you've got no choice. We're tribal animals, just like this one. He's a tribal animal. He needs love. You think he's a counter-dependent? He's not a counter-dependent. He needs love every day. He needs his ears pulling, all kinds of strokes. We're tribal creatures. You know, you probably read this stuff. It got really popular to talk about oxytocin, the endogenous drug that the body, the brain, the hormonal system produces, that feels good, that you get when somebody gives you a little strokey or you give somebody else a little strokey. These things we need. They're not non-essentials. There's some element of Western capitalism that over the years taught us to kind of be like Patrick Bateman of American Psycho crossed with the Terminator. Like, you don't need anything, you're just a machine, you do your job, you're a winner, everybody else sucks, you stamp on them and shoot them with a huge machine gun. That's not good, and it's not real, it's not true, where we really need each other a lot. And as I do this work more and more, I see just how much we as humans need tribal contact. We're herd animals. You know, our closest relatives are with each other all the time, and they're constantly like touching each other and preening each other, and when they're doing other stuff too. Oh, they're dirty, dirty little creatures. They're at us all the time. They fucking love it. So what am I talking about? Counterdependency. So you can't, when you see counterdependent tendencies in yourself, be really careful. Also, because if you trip over a certain boundary, you're moving into the land of the cluster B. If you trip over that boundary of going, well, I don't need anybody because I'm omnipotent, and you shut down an option for horizontal adult-to-adult dialogue because you don't need that, you're now moving into a kind of narcissism with a little n. Let's say narcissism with a little n. How? You're saying you're special. You're saying that you're not like all the other people. And this is a childish, let's not say childish because it's shaming, a childlike, a child mentality response to trauma that is, I'm magic and I have the magic cape and I don't need what other people need. And it's nonsense. It's not true. And the more you live in that denial, the sicker you get over time, and you may develop a full-blown personality disorder. Let me talk to you a little bit more about counterdependency. This is coming straight from the Wikipedia page. I'm going to, let's very quickly do developmental origins. The roots of counterdependency can be found in age-appropriate negativism of 2-year-olds and teens. Okay, what this means is the terrible twos. No, 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 no. No. Do you want to go to bed? No. Do you want some orange juice? No. Around the age of 2, the child should go through a process of, I've completely forgotten what the word is. It's like detachment. There is a better word, the proper psychological term. Whatever. Detachment. They're supposed to detach from the mum a little bit. And if the mother doesn't get triggered by that, and the father doesn't get triggered by that, and they don't suppress that detachment because they're not having the borderline fear of abandonment that might represent in the child, they'll let the child start to say no, and they'll let the child start to be their own defiant little emperor. When Freud spoke of, Freud never actually used the term, apparently, I looked this up recently, he never really said healthy narcissism. Other researchers afterwards reading he never said healthy narcissism. Other people inferred that he would speak of a kind of narcissism that was healthy and necessary in a 2-year-old. Because the 2-year-old is the emperor, the empress of the entire world, because the world is so small, they think that when they go to sleep and shut their eyes, the entire world goes black. And then when they open their eyes, that's when the sun comes up. And they should. That's normal. That's natural. So it says here, as Selma Freyberg put it, the 2-year-old says no with splendid authority to almost any question addressed to him, as if he establishes his independence as separate from his mother by being the opposite. So that's where this should be happening naturally. Where the mother has difficulty accepting the child's need for active distancing, that's not the word I was looking for either. The fuck is it? Detachment, active distancing, it's a movement towards sovereignty. The child may remain stuck in the counter-dependent phase of development because of developmental trauma. Let me use different language to explain the same thing. If the mother doesn't like the child saying no, the mother might shame him or her, or guilt him or her, or punish with rage him or her for demonstrating any kind of act of sovereignty and independence because she experiences it as an abandonment. She's terrified of that. In similar fashion, the teenager needs to be able to establish the fact of their separate mind to their parents. I think everybody kind of knows at an intellectual level that teenagers must rebel, and don't take it personally. They're supposed to rebel. They're supposed to push against you, because their way of finding who they are and forming their own ego is by pushing against you, and they will be shitty to you whilst they do that. And it's kind of a natural part of the process of growing up. That doesn't mean you should accept boundaryless shitty behavior, just that there is going to be that kind of rejection of you and oppositional response to you at some level. They need to, it's like when you're swimming and you need to go that way and you go up to the wall, you push against the wall to push yourself away so you can swim in the other direction. You don't do it to kick the wall. You don't do it because you hate wall. Wall is okay. Wall is good. Wall is my strength. Wall is my boundary. Wall is my foundation. There's no water in the pool without the wall. I'm not kicking the wall. I'm pushing away from the wall, swim away from it. Might be one way of looking at it. And if that doesn't happen in the teenage years, you're going to get what they call developmental trauma, which means as you're supposed to be going through this process, something has cut you off and stopped you. And you can actually get a traumatic response to that. It's very damaging if a parent doesn't let the child grow into an independent person. So here's the important bit. Adult manifestations of counterdependency. The counterdependent personality has been described as being addicted to activity and suffering from grandiosity, as acting strong and pushing others away. I usually would, as soon as you say grandiosity, people go, oh, narcissism, maybe that means I'm a narcissist. I tend to think of it as trying to be tough, the tough guys and tough girls of CPTSD. A good character who represents that in modern culture, one would be Clarice Starling from Silence of the Lambs, who has, we know, an extremely traumatic childhood and tries to live her life in a way that mitigates the trauma of her childhood. The entire point of that character's arc is that she's trying to save the innocent lambs from slaughter, and she does that by becoming an FBI agent. Another famous FBI agent with a few problems would be the one that Claire Danes plays in Homeland. You know, these are good examples of the tough guys and tough girls of CPTSD. They're self-neglecting, they're full of emotional dysregulation, but they're trying to process developmental trauma through their adult behaviors. Okay, so that's how I prefer to describe it. But this description is actually factually correct. The counter-dependent personality. So if it's not a counter-dependent tendency, it actually becomes your personality becomes counter-dependent. Then that has been described as being addicted to activity and suffering from grandiosity, as acting strong and pushing others away. Did you even know that you do that? For those of you who do that, and you're like, shit, that's me. Did you even know? Most people who are, in my experience, who are counter-dependent, they don't even realize they're doing that. They're like, no, I want people, I like people. Well, actually, through your strength and confidence, you're actually being a little bit of a dick, and you're pushing other people away, maybe at an unconscious level. Out of a fear of being crowded, they avoid contact with others, something which can lead through emotional isolation to depression. So the very thing that you yourself are doing is going to lead to emotional isolation and depression. And I just said what we really need is connection with other people. If you want to get better, you want to get healthy and move forward, and that requires vulnerability and humility. You must be humble. You must be able to be humble in order to connect with other people. You can't do connection with other people if you're on top and they're underneath all the time. You can for a few years and you can up to a certain age, but eventually as people become their own adults, they'll just be like, fuck you, I'm not doing that anymore. I don't like this relationship dynamic where you're always seeking to be above me, trying to impress upon me how strong and independent you are. So accidentally what happens is this person will become emotionally isolated, and they can become depressed. Depression, boys and girls, doesn't always manifest as sadness. It can manifest as extreme irritability. and extremes of emotional swinging, like what was typically or is typically referred to as bipolar. Very, very happy, very, very sad, very, very this, very, very that. Any kind of emotional dysregulation can actually be a sign of depression. That's just, you're sad because the rest of the tribe has abandoned you. And many counter dependents are obsessed with an internal narrative of everybody leaves me, everybody leaves me. And the frustration for the outsiders or people trying to form emotional connections with that people is, no, dude, you keep leaving us. I keep trying to form a connection with you and you keep burning that bridge. You keep hurting me. And every time I reach out, if you put a cigarette out on my hand, by the 5th time I do that, I'm just going to fucking stop reaching out. And then you will go into an inner narrative of, oh, he's abandoned me. When I haven't. I was punished for trying to form a connection with you because you found it provoking and triggering, and that it invoked an emotional flashback. The counter-dependent male, in particular, may pride himself on being manly, in inverted commas, not needing affection, support, or warmth, and being tough, independent, and normal instead. Something still reinforced by gender socialization. Where a woman takes on the counter-dependent position, it may take on the attributes of a false self or androcentric persona. I actually have known a couple of girls like this over the years who they would be like born again somethings, not necessarily born again Christians, but they'd have like a revelation in fitness. One girl, it was fitness, and then she went on to become a pro bodybuilder. Another girl had a revelation that was a religious revelation. Another girl I know had a revelation, and it was a pyramid sales scheme. And their personalities changed overnight, and they became strong and independent and confident, air quotes, air quotes, air quotes, where previously they had been weak and dependent, and they abandoned that, and now they're going to be tough. Now I'm a businesswoman, now I'm a bodybuilder, now I'm a truly religious follower of the faith. I'm going to abandon all that, and they become quite male, stereotypically male, aggressive about the whole thing. And it's all nonsense. It's not strength, it's not confidence, it's just more hot mess. The apparently independent behavior of the counter-dependent can act as a powerful lure for the codependent personality. Though once a couple has formed, the two partners, the codependent and the counter-dependent, are sometimes found to switch roles. Why? This is confusing and would take a whole thing to explain, but it comes back to the weak boundaries thing again. The counter-dependent and the codependent, words. The counter-dependent is a codependent. So the codependent, okay. Let me come back to that and then I'll finish on that one. In therapy, the counter-dependent personality often wishes to flee treatment as a defense against the possibility of regression. So the counter-dependent person is like, oh shit, this is going to take me back. This is going to undo all my good work. Fuck this, I'm leaving. By keeping the therapist at arm's length and avoiding reference to feelings as far as possible. I've had so many coaching clients, as soon as they go, okay, let's talk about how you feel, they're immediately like, I think, and they go back into thinking straight away. And I'm like, no, feeling. How do you feel? Using only adjectives that describe feeling words. How do you feel about that situation? For example, I feel afraid, I feel sad, I feel frustrated. And I go, yeah, I get you. Well, I really think that people should just bubba-da-bubba-da-bubba, and they go back into thinking and philosophizing about people in general, not themselves. It's really frustrating. They may attempt to control the therapist or the therapeutic process so as to preserve their sense of independence, which they hold on to. So their sense of independence, it's not like I like to feel independent. You might like to feel independent. If you're a counter-dependent, your sense of independence, serenity, and strength is survival. It's life and death. So you claw insanely, hysterically for that thing to maintain it. Am I still on? I was on the Wikipedia page. Hello? I'm still here. Okay, very cool. So a little bit about codependence and the counter-dependent, and then we'll stop because that was a hell of a lot. So codependency, again, this is from Wikipedia. Codependent relationships are a type of dysfunctional helping relationship where one person supports or enables another person's addiction, poor mental health, immaturity, irresponsibility, or underachievement. Among the core characteristics of codependency, the most common theme is an excessive reliance on other people for approval and identity. The codependent literally it kind of opens up their boundaries and takes in the other person as though they were them. And that's where, you know, a true out and out codependent, they draw their sense of self from the other person. These are the people who are addicted to relationships with fixer-uppers. They're not seeing who the person is, they're seeing their potential. If only they could be given love and support, then maybe they would be this, that, and the other. And they are frequently the targets of cluster Bs and narcissistic personalities. You have a perfect parasite, a perfect predator, and a perfect host. Boom, in they go. The counter-dependent might not necessarily be a narcissist or a borderline or a histrionic or a psychopath. They might just be addicted to a sense of their own independence and a sense of their own strength and not needing of others, because it's like a magic cloak that protects them from their own unpleasant, unwanted feelings that are emotionally flashbacking from childhood, that are terror, helplessness, depression, and all this other stuff. They'd much rather just feel better about themselves than deal with all that emotional shit. And counter-dependents talk like that about coaching. They'll ask me for coaching and then they'll say, but I don't want to talk about all that emotional shit. I don't want to do any of that fuzzy-wuzzy fucking family of origin shit. And I'm like, well, that shit that you're talking about is pretty much what I do. So you're actually taking a shit on what I do and not making me want to help you. And this is where in therapy, I'm not a therapist, I'm a life coach. In therapy, there's a lot of problems with this personality type because the therapist will start to get pissed off, because that's a human being too. The coach, the counselor, the therapist will start to get annoyed, like, well, why are you asking me for help? A good person with tons of anecdotes about that is Marsha Linehan. But there are other people who, you know, are really, really good at dealing with that kind of thing. I'm not. I have absolutely zero interest in doing that kind of work with people, because it's just really annoying and it doesn't suit my personality type, and it's not what I signed up for when I started doing the Spartan Life Coach, which is supposed to be about teaching people to basically be a bit more assertive. So that's the codependent relationship. Why would a counter-dependent and a codependent switch roles? In brief, remember, it's just about weak boundaries. So the counter-dependent is a kind of codependent to the extent that they also have extremely weak boundaries and they don't really know the difference between themselves and others. Now, am I saying that some people are walking through life and they don't know the difference between themselves and others ever? Absolutely not. I'm saying this only pertains, or usually pertains, more to a relationship in which there is more what? Intimacy, vulnerability, and therefore risk. That's when the drama and the cray-cray goes up. That's when you might not be counter-dependent with your boss. You might not be a counter-dependent with your favorite drinking buddy, with your mate who you do tennis with. There might be no counter-dependency there. But when you get into a certain level of intimacy, like with a therapist or with a family member or with somebody that you're intimate with, that's when the triggers are the minds are triggered, the minefield is triggered off, and that's when you start to get into trouble. I think I did it. I think I nailed it. High five to me. High fives himself. He's such a narcissist. He said he's really good, and he high fives himself. The narcissist. Maxie, it's Max time. This should be, if this was a TV show, there'd be a segment now, and Max would have his own little. It's Max time. It's Max time. It would be a bit like Max. Look how cool he is. He doesn't even care. Maxie, stop being a hipster douche. Maxifer. Big boy, come, just for a second. I know you're busy. You're thinking about the world, politics, and important businesses. Max, okay, all right. Now you're out of shot. Good boy, Max. Can you, Maxie, look at this? Look. Max is not playing. Okay, that's enough of Max. He doesn't want to play today. Let's just give him a little strokey. Okay, I'm going to answer a few questions and then I need to wrap it up there. Dennis says vulnerability is crucial in developing. I totally agree. It's a tough one, but we must absolutely, sir. Funny you should say that. I do sometimes find that, like Peter Sellers, I will actually adopt the same mannerisms, even voice of the person I'm talking to, although I do it less since my CPTSD work with you. It must be a form of people pleasing. It's a form of fawning. So your actors and great performers often will have CPTSD, and you know, take any great actor that you really love, and their ability to assume the persona so convincingly of another human being will usually come, in my opinion, from CPTSD. Couple more questions, then I need to go. I don't think I'm a codependent, but this sounds like me. Eek! So glad I'm single right now. Okay. Gui asks, can I ask your opinion about others things? Usually in a normal Google Hangout you can, Sarah, but this was an unannounced one off the cuff, and I'm afraid I don't have time to talk about anything else other than counter dependency and codependency today. Okay, boys and girls, I hope you found that useful, and I hope the person who I did this video for predominantly found it useful. Let that information sink in, kid. And I will speak to you all again soon. Thank you very much for your time and your attention, and take care.